Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Long.
The Indiana General Assembly is in its 30-day short session in this election year. License branch reform, liability insurance, education among the top issues. Discussing those issues and more with us today will be Wayne Townsend, a state senator who serves the district roughly from Muncie to Marion, or Muncie to Fort Wayne. And if you see him campaigning in your backyard, it's because he's also been out on the stump campaigning for governor a couple of times. Also with us today, John Rouse, professor of political science at Ball State University and producer of Public Affairs Roundtable. Senator Townsend, we're in what we call the short session with supposedly a limited scope. Is it time we really put that behind us to say, let's forget that there's supposed to be some limited scope and let's open it wide open? Or maybe we should even expand this session and make it another long session, 60 working days instead of 30. How does that sit with you?
Oh, Larry, I'd have difficulty being enthused about it. The program for Indiana historically has been a citizens' legislature. I think we're in danger of making it a full-time legislature if we're not careful. I've been able to serve because I've been able to make a living too, and I would like to keep it that way, and I think a lot of other people would too. I think if we make it full-time or drift in that direction, we're going to deny the people of Indiana the services of a lot of legislators who would like to serve, but of necessity must make a living doing other things. I, for one, would like to keep it that way.
Are we trying to do too much, though, in this 30-day session?
Well, the time constraints limit what we can do. The original mission of the annual session, the short session, was to take care of emergency matters. It's gone beyond that a little bit. But I think if we get down to business and make better use of our time,
Tuesday at 9 p.m. on
can be accomplished in
WIPB.
that 30 working day period.
The evening at 9:30.
One fault I find with
Tuesday
it
at
is that
10
we're
p.m.
not very
on
productive
Channel
at
49.
times. And of course,
Tuesday
democracies are
evening at
not supposed to
10:30.
be efficient. But I think we could be
Tuesday
more
at 11
efficient than
p.m.
we now
on
are and make
Channel
better use of our
49.
time.
So much to do in so little time in this session. What are your priorities, or what do you think the legislature's priorities ought to be?
Well, I think in any session of the
Tuesday
General
afternoon
Assembly,
on Channel 49.
the future of Indiana is the
on
most
49.
important thing we have to look
Tuesday at
toward.
6 p.m. on WIPB.
And that the most important thing we do
Tuesday
at
at
any time
6:30
is
on
to
Channel
program
49.
the future of
Tuesday
public
at 7
education in
o'clock
the
on
state.
49.
And
Tuesday at
we
7:30
have
on
begun to
WIPB.
realize, perhaps
Tuesday
some
at
have
8
begun to
p.m.
realize,
on
I should
Channel
say, because I
49.
felt that for a long time.
Tuesday evening at
The single
8:30
most
on
important
49.
factor in economic development is the education level of our people. And we have not been as competitive as we should be in recent months and recent years, and I think that's beginning to show. And there are things that should be addressed this time. And I think a few things will be.
Education, improvement in education generally means spending more money. There have been proposals to raise more money through various taxes or levies to help pay teachers more, which is seen as one method of improving public education. Do we have the money, the resources to provide our children with the kind of education that you're talking about?
If people think it's important, we have the money. A lot of it is the attitude of the general public towards the importance of education. And we have not done as well on accountability as we should in recent years. I think, generally speaking, the public would support greater resources going into education if they can be shown the benefits from it. Now, we have limited benefits this particular session because the resources collected from taxes is down from what it was expected to be. But I think we need to plan ahead. I think that you'll see some vast improvements in the Department of Education, or what we used to call the Superintendent of Public Instruction's office. It got so bad that it finally exploded in some short time ago. And I believe that you'll see some moves made to have people with more expertise, more able people involved in that office. It was a political haven for political hacks who were able to move into patronage jobs that had little productivity towards making Indiana school systems better than what they were.
Yes. Excuse me, but if you look at that issue, isn't the issue of the superintendent just the tip of the iceberg? Isn't the problem all throughout the teaching system, the educational system that we have in this state? And if we do not reform the people who are teaching the kids, if the teacher unions don't respond to merit systems and that kind of thing, isn't the issue of changing from an elected public instructor head to a selected one just the tip of the iceberg?
It's a part of it, but it's part of the attitudinal acceptance, not only of legislators, but administrators as well at the top end who were willing to accept the system because it was there and because it might be painful to change it. I don't know we need reformation among the teachers. I think we need to attract and hold the best and the brightest in the classroom. And at the salary levels we're talking about, we're not going to do that. We're just not competitive with the private market. We're not even competitive with surrounding states insofar as teachers' salaries are concerned. We have to change that, I think, if you want to improve the quality of our educational system.
Is that then part of what the governor called in his State of the State message the golden age?
Well, who knows what the governor meant? I don't know. I thought his message was interesting. It was terribly short on substance. If you took the reference out about the license branch reform and the appointment of the superintendent, there wasn't much there. And I suppose if you have limited things to talk about, you talk about the abstract rather than something specific. But I don't know what he meant by golden age. It sounds nice.
Education was one of the key issues mentioned by the governor in his address this week. One of your Democratic colleagues in the Senate, Louis Mahern from Indianapolis, said, "I'm glad to see the governor's finally coming around to the Democratic position on education." Is that the case? Are Republicans now looking at education the way Democrats did 5 or 10 years ago?
Larry, I don't know. I haven't seen enough demonstrated to persuade me that that is the case. I was interested in a comment made by the lieutenant governor a few days ago in which he said that he's accepting the fact that education is a part of economic development. I guess I question whether or not they have felt that way before, but the single most important factor in being able to attract and hold jobs in Indiana is the quality of the education of our workforce. And when you're talking about being 45th or below in what we invest in public education, if you're in that area and the percentage of students going on to college, if you're in that area in SAT scores, and our quality is not what it ought to be, we simply cannot compete, or not competing with other states as well as we should.
Another issue, if we can move on to this point, the license branch reform.
I thought you never mentioned it.
You've made a campaign of this, 1984, your campaign against Governor Orr. Is he, and Louis Mahern said the same thing, Republicans are coming around to a Democratic perspective on this as well?
Well, I would think so. And Larry, my objection to the license branch system is not just what takes place there. It is bad because we're being forced to contribute to a political party without our choice. You have to pay to get your license, and part of that money goes to the Republican Party to finance their re-elections. But it's become corrupt, not only among the people serving in the license branch system, but the State Board of Accounts. I think it's very regrettable. They have been persuaded they should help cover up the corruption, and I have never seen that happen in my 25 or 30 years of public service. But the system is symptomatic of what's acceptable and when tolerated in the way of corruption in this administration. Not only there, but the Department of Public Education that where we saw things going on that should not have gone on. Department of Administration where unwholesome things went on. And Larry, it's indicative of the tolerance that those people have for all levels of corruption. I think there's a good place to start changing it.
If this system was so wrong, unique in its way of providing money to a political system, to a political party, if it's so wrong, why has it gone so long without being reversed, thrown out in court, rather than waiting for some legislation?
Well, interestingly enough, the courts sometimes make political decisions, and there were 2 legislators 3 or 4 years ago that sought remedy in court. And it's impossible almost to believe that the court involved in that made political decisions. I think the pressure from those who are in leadership in the political organizations is a part of it. Both parties participated in it. The Republican Party benefited many times, does benefit, probably close to 10 to 1, the amount of money they get from it compared to what the Democrats get from it. But even among the Democrats, who should be beating the door down to get this changed, there was a certain degree of acceptance of the system.
Yeah, well, we mentioned this, that it was a Democratic issue, but in fact, the county chairmen throughout Indiana, many of them, most of them perhaps, opposed any sort of change.
Well, on the contrary, Larry, you may remember we came out publicly in October of '83 to change the system. And prior to the time that we made that announcement, we talked to the Democratic county chairman in the state and told them we were going to take that position, that it must be changed. We found surprising acceptance. Some did not accept it well, but most did.
Wayne, if I could follow up on that, it seems with the large majorities that the Republicans have in both houses, the 61-39 in the House and the 30-20 in the Senate, isn't the Democratic Party in this state in the position of being co-opted by the Republicans? In other words, the Republican establishment in Indiana wants to share power, but wants to share responsibility with the Democrats, but not power. So aren't the Democrats in the position of raising the issues like license branch reform, educational reform, welfare reform? The Democrats raise the issues, and then the power being with the established Republican Party, they implement those reforms?
Well, I suppose that's one disadvantage of being in the minority. We hope to change that. I think we will. As you may know, John, there was a reapportionment suit filed with the courts, and the Supreme Court now has that within its jurisdiction, whereby we have protested the computerized map drawing that permits the Republicans to control, even though they don't get 50% of the vote. And we think that's wrong. And, there comes a time when people rebel against the arrogance of power, and I think we're close to that in the state of Indiana.
Well, isn't it frustrating then, both from a policy point of view of making all those proposals and then having the issues taken away from you? And also, it's frustrating, I would think, in a sense that as you try to lead with the fact that, as you mentioned, the implication that you have less money, less organization, and so forth, isn't it very frustrating for you as a leader of the Democratic Party to come forth with new kinds of proposals, attempting to get your own candidacy elected for governor?
Well, it's frustrating, I suppose, at times, but I can't help but believe that the Republicans are going to have great difficulty persuading the public that they thought the license branch reform was their idea, and or that many educational reforms were their ideas. I think it's up to us to set the record clear with the person up and down Main Street, and I suspect we will.
Well, does the Indiana Democratic Party have a bright future? Are we seemingly desperate for a candidate for the United States Senate to run against Dan Quayle? Nobody's really emerged as not only a front runner, but as a solid, bona fide, legitimate candidate.
Well, Larry, we are intimidated by the money. I think we'll have a good candidate for the United States Senate. I'm not sure that person is going to be, but I suspect within the next week or 10 days we'll have an announcement on that. There is so much money involved through the patronage system and through the ability to raise funds by having been in power, being in power, that it's difficult to compete. But we're not impressed with Quayle the man. We're not impressed with Quayle's record. Collectively, as a party, we are intimidated by the amount of resources he has in his bank account that he can put in the campaign. I think that's wrong.
Is that a good argument for public financing of campaigns?
I think we must have public financing. Voluntarily, not to be required to contribute to either party. But I think it's awfully important if we want a strong, viable two-party system, and I think best government's brought about by that, whether it be in Indiana or somewhere else, that both political parties should be strong, should be viable. And from that, we'll have good government. But when all the resources are moving into to one party, it is called it times to compete.
Well, and it's unlikely we're going to see public financing, I'd say, in the near future anyway. And the Democratic Party has been out of the governor's office in Indiana not just for a couple of terms, but a couple of decades. Is there hope there? Is the party
I thought
coming
so.
back?
I thought so.
Still think so?
I think it had not been for the national situation, you might have sent a Democratic governor by now. But 1984 was a terribly difficult year to compete.
88 will be better?
What? 88? Yes, I do. I think 86 will be better. The tide ebbs and flows. And let me harken back to 1956, when Eisenhower had been elected by almost a record margin, as I recall, in 1956. And 1958 was a terribly strong Democratic year in Indiana. Things have a way of changing, and they'll change again.
If I can keep you on this issue, of course, you ran in 1980, and you ran in 1984. Or are you going to run in 1988?
Gosh, I don't know. Who knows? Ask me some weeks down the road.
If I could get to that whole issue in terms of, if you look at the Democratic Party in Indiana, you have the Hillenbrand, Simon, Conrad faction of it, and then from my perception at least, you have the Labor Wayne Townsend faction. My perception is that those two factions never have really gotten together behind your candidacy in 1984 and also behind the Hillenbrand run in 1980. Is that still going to be a problem if you run again in 1988?
Well, I don't perceive that as being as wide a group to bring together as what the Republican Party nationally has, from the extreme right to somewhere slightly to the left of center. Any party has a big umbrella, and we're effective depending on how well we're able to bring those people back under the umbrella. We should. It's not unusual.
What kind of leadership is it going to take on your part to bring together the factions of the Democratic Party to win in '88?
I think we had a decent job done in 1984.
But I'm talking about '88.
'88? Well, I think you have a different situation in '88 than what you had in '84. You had a terribly strong vote-getter for president on the Republican Party in 1984. That person will not be there in '88, and I can't understand all the attraction to the president. Apparently, it's people are attracted to him. Tremendous personality when it comes to relating to people and communicating with people. I don't see anyone on the scene that will take the slack that Reagan brought to that. Take up the slack that Reagan brought to that office. Coupled with that, I think we are approaching a day of reality. With federal deficit spending. We cannot continue on the same sort of program we have been. I think people are going to awaken to the fact that we are mortgaging somebody else's our future in this state.
But how important is that issue going to be for John Mutz, who's going to probably be the candidate for the...
Well, you cannot divorce the effect that Ronald Reagan had on the 1984 election here.
Okay.
Certainly the national and state parties are not divorced from each other.
Well, the Indiana Democratic Party in 1988 is also going to need a strong, credible candidate at the top of the ticket for president. And if there's some criticism of the Democratic Party nationally, it's much the same as it is in Indiana, that you don't have enough money, and where are the rising stars of the party? Are you concerned that perhaps Democrats nationally cannot put a strong candidate at the top?
No, I'm not. We have a lot of qualified people, and may even have a few surprises.
Any endorsements here now?
No endorsements, but you've been out power for a while nationally. Why, you may take a different direction.
The pendulum theory coming back your way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the real supporters of your candidacies in the past has been organized labor.
Mm-hmm.
I think the impression that people have is that labor is still a very important facet in the implementation of the workforce and work in America. But organized labor, in terms of its members, is going down. As an insider, what kinds of things, what kinds of advice do you give to organized labor to try to encourage organized labor to reform itself from inside so it can be more effective for fighting for its issues?
Well, it's not necessarily to say organized labor, it's say working men and women. And that's a pretty broad spectrum that we have to appeal to. I think recent policies nationally have led me to believe that we are on a direction of becoming a nation of the have and have-nots. And that is not the kind of America that I am looking for, that we should, I think, try and appeal to the masses with. Tremendous pressures to export jobs, searching for cheap labor. But someday somebody's going to have to buy the automobiles and the boats and build the homes. And if we don't have people in this country with the resources and incomes to do that, they're not going to have the kind of America that I want, and I think our people who are working men and women want. Those things that's made this country great.
Yeah, the thing you're referring to, of course, is from every indication, the middle class is becoming smaller and smaller.
That's right, and you have a spectrum on each end that there are those who would love to have the wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, and I don't think that's the kind of country we want.
If Republicans do vastly improve education, however you measure that, at least in terms of spending per capita, perhaps.
Don't say spending, say investment.
Investment in education, excuse me. If the Republican legislature provides us with some license branch reform, what issues does the Democratic Party have in 86 and 88?
I think the major issue in 86 and 88 will be the tolerance for corruption that they have had. Larry, they've had to have known, as did we. We didn't have enough evidence to come public with it. They had to know of the corruption in the Department of Education. They had to have known of the corruption in the license branch system. They had to know of the corruption within the Department of Administration. And it's simply a level of tolerance for corruption that people don't have any time for. I think that will be a major issue. We have heard about the effective job that John Mutz has done in bringing industry to the state. It's sheer nonsense. We have missed major plants that have gone into states all around us that could have gone to Indiana. And I don't see them being effective in that area. I don't see them being really committed to quality public education. They've had how many years now? 20 years in public office. Their main objective is to have bring about a low-tax state. And that may sound good on the surface, but low resources and quality public education are not compatible. Somewhere there's a middle ground that we must establish if we want this state to be what its potential, reach its potential.
Do you have a specific criticism of Lieutenant Governor Mutz or Governor Orr or the administration in terms of the fact that they lost the Toyota plant to Kentucky, lost the Saturn plant to Tennessee, lost the Mitsubishi plant to Illinois? Is there something differently you would have done had you been governor?
I would have started years ago on trying to improve the quality of our educational system. I think we're seeing the results of that. And the results of being caught up in trying to make Indiana look attractive simply because of low taxes. That is only one factor, and perhaps ranks 7th, 8th, 10th down on the list. And why we look attractive to someone who might come here and employ people. I think it's ironic that Governor Alexander of Tennessee never once went to Detroit to try and obtain the Saturn plant. Now, there was communication, but what he did say to the people at GM, we will provide those resources that are important to you to make your factory effective and productive. And those resources were interstate highway travel, railroads, a reasonably priced source of dependable power, water and sewage, and a training program for the people who are going to work in that plant. Essentially, those are what, and no great big tax break of some kind to bring them down there. But what does it take to make that plant attractive, productive, and have good quality of life in that area?
If we can go back to that phrase that the governor raised, the golden age concept, I'm not sure what his golden age concept is, but can you tell us what, you're talking about quality of life when you talk about how our state's different from the other states. What is missing here in Indiana that perhaps we're not measuring up to other kinds of standards that other states have?
Well, I think really we should look at communities. Industries basically not only move to states, they move to communities. And what is that quality of life like you have in your community? Do you have good schools? Do you have good recreational facilities? Do you have good hospital facilities? Good cultural facilities? Can you get to and from work with ease? Do you have good water and sewage systems? Do you have a place for plant site? And, in too many cases in Indiana, we have not done as well as we should have.
Yeah, to me that's still very vague in a sense. But it's a matter, in a sense, of how people feel about themselves and how active they are as a population, and also how they feel about their politicians. Man, this is a very general question. Maybe it comes down to the role of the governed and the governors. Mm-hmm. And how can we change that? You have just told us, for example, that the short session should stay the way it is. We should not have a full-time legislature. How do we handle these issues?
Answer that 60-second question in 30 seconds.
Well, I think you have to have faith. You have to have faith in leadership. The leadership has to be candid and honest and tell it like it is. I think that, and has to feel good about itself. And I think that, it is happening here in Muncie. That rubs off on other people.
All right. Thank you, Senator Wayne Townsend, for sharing your morning with us here. Thanks also to John Rouse, producer of Public Affairs Roundtable, for being with us. I'm Larry Law. Thank you for joining us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana, 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Cecil Bohannon and Bill Mosier. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.